Imagine yourself in a distant world, centuries past. The cold wind whispers through vast, rolling plains, the sound of waves crashing against rocky shores, and the deep scent of the earth and salt filling the air. You stand on the edge of a bustling Viking settlement, where life is hard, simple, and often brutal. Yet within these harsh lands there lies a story not often told. A story of unfree labor, where lives were shaped by chains, literal and metaphorical. Tonight, as the gentle flicker of candlelight dances across the walls of your room, I invite you to relax, to ease into the rhythm of the past, and explore what it was truly like to be a Viking thrall, the slave of the Viking world. Allow the calm pace of history to guide you as we uncover the lives of those who were captured, bound, and sold into servitude, their names rarely spoken, yet their labor at the heart of Viking prosperity. Through a calm, steady flow of stories, we'll journey into the lives of these forgotten souls, the ones whose struggles, hardships, and small glimmers of hope often went unnoticed. You'll find yourself drifting deeper into a world where survival was a constant struggle, yet where culture, ritual, and the faintest promise of freedom lingered in the shadows. Let your mind wander now as we begin the first chapter of this quiet exploration. Segment 1. You've been captured. Welcome to life as a thrall. Imagine for a moment that you are not free. You were once like them, an individual, a person with a name, with dreams, with a place in the world. But that was before the day you were captured. It could have happened on the shores of your homeland, perhaps in a small village by the sea, or in the heart of a dense forest where the quiet hum of life seemed safe. Or maybe you were traveling, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond the trees, where Viking raiders, driven by hunger for riches, power, or simply conquest, set their sights on you. You are bound by rough ropes, dragged across the ground, your face pressed against the earth's cold surface. Your once peaceful world is shattered by the brutal reality of being taken. As you are forced onto a longship, your legs numb from kneeling, you are not alone. Many others like you are bound in silence. No one speaks, not out of respect, but because silence is survival. Your captors are strong, and their ship creaks beneath the weight of its passengers. The journey is long, the waves relentless, and the stench of sweat, salt, and fear fills the air. When the land finally appears, it is not the shores of a welcoming world. It is a harsh and unforgiving landscape, populated by others like your captors, who see you not as a human, but as a tool, an object to be used, a part of the machinery that keeps the Viking world turning. You are no longer a person with a name. You have been renamed. You no longer have a place in society. You are now a thrall, a slave. The word carries weight, and that weight is yours to carry for as long as you live. The first days of your captivity are a blur, filled with hard labor, harsh treatment, and little rest. You sleep not in a bed or even a shelter, but beside the animals in a cramped, dark corner of your master's farmstead. The straw smells damp and heavy, and the air is thick with the scent of livestock. Your back aches from the hard ground, and your stomach grumbles, a reminder of the little food that is shared, much of it leftovers from your master's own meals. The days stretch endlessly. The work is grueling, demanding, and endless. Whether in the fields, building structures, or tending to the livestock, your time is no longer your own. You live not for yourself, but for the benefit of another. Your body is a tool, and the rhythm of your labor becomes the rhythm of your existence. From dawn until dusk, you toil, bound to the will of your master, with no escape in sight. Sometimes there is a glimpse of hope, perhaps the faintest whisper of a kind word from a fellow thrall. But such moments are rare, fleeting, and always overshadowed by the looming presence of those in power. The overseer watches your every move. One misstep, one error in judgment could lead to punishment. Some thralls, it is said, were even sacrificed in the aftermath of their master's death, a grim ritual to ensure that their master's journey into the afterlife would be prosperous and secure. You begin to learn the ways of this world, the language, the customs, and the harsh reality that your life is no longer your own. You may have been captured on the battlefield, or perhaps your fate was sealed by a raid. But now, all that matters is survival, and yet, deep inside, there lingers a quiet, almost unspoken thought. What would it be like to be free, to escape, to slip away in the darkness of the night, to feel the wind on your face once more, and know that it is not the wind of your master's domain, but the wind of your own choosing? But that, for now, is just a dream. As you lay your head on the cold earth tonight, the weight of your chains is a constant reminder of the life you once knew, and the life you are now forced to endure. But even in this harsh world, there remains a part of you, hidden beneath the surface, that yearns for freedom. And so, you rest as best as you can, surrounded by the distant sounds of the Viking world, the crash of waves against the shore, the bleating of goats, the creaking of wooden structures in the wind. It is a world of harshness, of struggle, and of survival. But in the quiet moments, you can almost feel a whisper of something more, something that speaks of hope, even in the darkest of circumstances. Segment 2. The Slave Who Escaped. The True Tale of Tovi, the Runaway. Now, imagine for a moment that the chains binding you are not just a weight on your body, but a constant reminder of the dream you hold deep within your heart, the dream of freedom. While many thralls may have resigned themselves to their fate, there are those rare individuals whose spirit refuses to be broken. This is the story of one such individual, Tovi, a thrall who dared to escape. The Vikings, for all their fierce reputation on the battlefield, were also a people who understood the value of slaves. A thrall could be the most loyal of servants or the most skilled of craftsmen, but Tovi was neither. He was a symbol of something else: resistance. Tovi was no different from the countless other thralls who were captured and sold into slavery. His life was shaped by the brutal hand of his masters, but in him there burned a flicker of defiance, a desire to escape, to reclaim his humanity, to carve a life beyond the reach of his captors. Tovi's story comes to us not from the detailed records of kings and warriors, but from the sagas, ancient stories passed down through the generations. These sagas, while often filled with the glory of battle and the grandeur of kings, also contain the whispers of those who lived in the shadows. And it is in these shadows that Tovi's tale lives on. Tovi's escape was not one of dramatic heroism or daring feats of physical prowess. It was quiet, subtle, and driven by the smallest spark of hope. One cold, dark night, when the world was silent save for the wind and the distant cries of the sea, Tovi made his move. It was not a moment of recklessness, but of careful calculation. He knew that to run would be to risk everything, but to stay would be to lose everything. Imagine yourself in Tovi's shoes, every step taken in the dead of night, as the faint glow of the moonlight dances off the snow-covered ground. Your breath is steady, despite the fear that gnaws at your insides. You slip away from the sleeping farmstead, careful not to disturb the others. The cold air bites at your skin, and the crunch of snow beneath your feet is the only sound that accompanies your heart pounding in your chest. There is no grand plan, no elaborate escape route, only the simple desire to be free. Tovi moved north, away from his captors, away from the life that had been thrust upon him. The harsh lands of the north were treacherous, with jagged cliffs, dense forests, and frozen waters, but they offered the hope of anonymity and, perhaps, freedom. For days Tovi traveled alone, relying on the wilderness to sustain him. The biting cold seeped into his bones, and the hunger gnawed at his stomach, but still, he pressed on. It was not just the hope of escape that kept him going. It was the vision of a future, however uncertain, where he could stand as a man, not as a possession. Tovi's journey took him to a remote fjord, a place so isolated that even the most determined of pursuers would find it difficult to follow. The land around him was stark, wild, and beautiful in its emptiness. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of salt water, while the land itself seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. It was a place where one could lose oneself, where a man like Tovi could vanish into the earth, into the sky, into the wind. In the sagas, the ending of Tovi's story is left uncertain. Some believe he may have lived out his days in freedom, hidden from the reach of his former masters. Others say he perished in the wilderness, unable to endure the harshness of the land alone. But what is certain is that Tovi's story was one of courage, however quiet, and determination, however small. His escape was not marked by a climactic moment of victory, but by the enduring power of the human spirit, the belief that even in the darkest of circumstances, there is always a glimmer of hope. Tovi's story serves as a quiet reminder that, no matter how impossible it seems, the desire for freedom cannot be easily extinguished. Now, as we move into the next segment, let us shift our focus to a different kind of story, the kind that the earth itself can tell us about the lives of thralls. We move away from the individual and toward the collective history left behind, buried beneath the soil, where the nameless masses of Viking slaves still whisper from the graves and artifacts they left behind. Just let your mind ease as we transition into the next part of our journey. Segment 3. Shackles in the Soil. Archaeological clues of Viking slavery. As we move deeper into the past, we step away from the personal stories and into a realm where the earth itself holds the remnants of lives once lived. In the quiet solitude of the land, there are traces, subtle yet unmistakable, of those who lived in bondage. These traces do not speak in words, but in the relics they left behind. Chains, worn tools, graves without valuables. These are the whispers of a forgotten world, one where unfree labor was the lifeblood of a thriving society. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in the midst of an excavation. The soil is cold beneath your feet, and the air is still. A soft breeze rustles the leaves of the surrounding trees, and in the distance, the faint sound of waves crashing against the shore reaches your ears. Before you lies a dig site, where archaeologists have carefully uncovered a burial site. At first glance, it appears like any other grave, but as the dirt is gently removed, more details emerge. There, in the grave, is something that tells a different story, something that suggests the deceased was not a respected warrior, a noble, or even an ordinary farmer. The grave is bare, stripped of the valuables that would accompany a man of stature. No weapons, no coins, no personal possessions to mark his life. What lies there, however, is a set of iron shackles, rusted and worn with age, yet still intact. These shackles speak volumes. This person was a thrall, a slave, whose life ended with no recognition beyond the iron that bound them. The presence of shackles in graves is not a rare occurrence. In Viking burial sites, where the dead were often given objects of value to accompany them in the afterlife, these graves stand out. They speak of a class of people who had no wealth, no power, and no say in their own destinies. But these shackles also tell a deeper story about the Viking world, about how the labor of these individuals was central to the success of the society. Much of what we know about Viking slavery comes from these archaeological clues. In some cases, the remains of thralls were found alongside the tools of their labor, simple implements like axes or spades, worn down by years of hard work. In other cases, the graves reveal little beyond the remains themselves, but the absence of grave goods tells us something significant. Thralls, though numerous, were not treated as individuals of value. They were seen as tools, their lives expendable, their memories buried with the earth. Archaeological sites also reveal another subtle clue: the way in which the remains of these individuals were treated. In some instances, the bodies of thralls were not placed in tombs or honored with the rights of the free. Instead, their graves were hastily dug, their bodies often left in shallow pits, sometimes without even the most basic of rituals. This lack of care contrasts sharply with the elaborate burials of Viking leaders and warriors, who were often interred with great ceremony, surrounded by treasures and offerings to the gods. Yet, even in these humble graves, there is something powerful, something that speaks to the endurance of the human spirit. The bones of these individuals, though worn by time, still carry the marks of life lived in struggle. Their very existence is a testament to the unseen hands that built the Viking world, the hands of the thralls, whose labor was invisible but essential to the prosperity of the free. The tools they used also tell a story of life in servitude. Many of the implements found in the graves of thralls are not sophisticated or ornate, but are instead simple, functional tools, blades dulled by constant use, wooden handles worn smooth by the pressure of daily labor. These tools are not just objects, they are symbols of the backbreaking work that define the life of a thrall. The repetitive motions, the long hours, the ever-present fatigue, this is the reality they faced every day. But there is one more important clue that the earth offers us: the presence of tattoos. Some remains have been found with markings that suggest the use of ink, perhaps symbols or designs etched into the skin. These tattoos may have been worn by the thralls as a form of identification, a way to mark ownership. While much is still unknown about Viking tattoo practices, these markings suggest a personal history, one that could not be erased, even by death. The tattoos, if they existed, might have been a silent rebellion, a way for a thrall to express their identity, even in the face of the forces that sought to strip them of it. The earth holds many such secrets, quiet stories of lives lived in the shadows of the Viking world. And as we stand here in this timeless place, we are reminded that the story of the Viking slave is not just one of suffering, but also of survival. The thralls may have been forgotten by history, but the traces they left behind are enduring. These relics are their legacy, offering us a glimpse into the lives of those who shaped the Viking world, even if they were never remembered in the annals of glory. Now, we will move from the past, where the earth tells its stories, to the power structures that define the lives of those who held others in chains. Let us turn our attention to the elite, to the kings and jarls who relied on the labor of thralls to build their wealth and maintain their power. Let your mind relax as we transition into the final chapter of our journey. Segment 4. The richest own the most, the elite slave economy of Viking kings. As we near the final chapter of this journey through Viking history, Imagine yourself stepping into a grand hall, dimly lit, yet filled with an overwhelming sense of wealth and power. The air is thick with the scent of burning wood, the warmth of the hearth, and the faintest trace of mead that lingers in the air. The walls are adorned with tapestries depicting fierce warriors and kings, and the floor beneath your feet is made of polished stone, worn smooth by the footsteps of countless powerful men. In this hall, the atmosphere is thick with expectation. The men gathered here are not the farmers, the craftsmen, or the thralls. These are the kings, the jarls, the elite of Viking society. Their lives are worlds apart from those who serve them, and their power rests not only in their warriors and ships, but in something far darker, something that has been, for centuries, the unspoken foundation of Viking wealth, the labor of slaves. The Viking elite were not only warriors, they were merchants, traders, and landowners. They understood the value of human life, but not in the way we understand it today. To them, thralls were not people. They were property, tools, and commodities to be bought, sold, and traded. The more thralls a Viking leader owned, the more wealth and power they could amass. Imagine the scene: a bustling market, perhaps near the shores of a fjord, where Viking traders have gathered to barter goods. You can hear the low murmur of voices, the clink of metal coins, the shuffling of feet on gravel, and the calls of merchants offering everything from furs to weapons. But among the goods exchanged, swords, shields, and silks, there are also people, thralls captured and sold, standing in rows, waiting for the highest bidder. Their eyes are downcast, their expressions blank, resigned to their fate. To the traders, they are no different from cattle. The wealth of Viking kings and jarls was often measured not just in treasure, but in the number of thralls they controlled. The most powerful men, those who could afford the grandest feasts, the most lavish burials, and the largest armies, were those who had access to the largest slave populations. A king with hundreds, even thousands of thralls could build the grandest ships, cultivate vast estates, and ensure the survival of his dynasty. Thralls were the backbone of the Viking economy, the engine that powered everything from agriculture to warfare. But the relationship between the elite and their thralls was not a simple one. These thralls were not just used for manual labor. They were also essential to the cultural and spiritual life of the Vikings. Some thralls, particularly women, were brought into the household as concubines or servants. In some cases, they were even forced into ritual roles, including sacrifices to the gods. The Vikings believed that offering thralls in sacrifice to their deities would ensure the favor of the gods, bringing prosperity, victory in battle, and good fortune in life. The thrall's life was expendable, but their death held the promise of divine reward for their masters. Despite their status, the lives of thralls were deeply entwined with the fortunes of their masters. A king or jarl's success was often linked to the number of thralls under their control. The more thralls they owned, the more resources they could command, and the more secure their power became. This system of human ownership was as much a part of Viking prosperity as their ships or their raiding strategies. But even in this world, there were complexities. A thrall could, in rare cases, be manumitted, freed by their master. This freedom was not guaranteed, and it was rarely achieved, but for those who managed to escape the chains of their captors, it represented the ultimate victory. Some thralls who had gained their freedom would even rise to positions of influence, becoming traders, warriors, or even landowners in their own right. Their ascent, however, was often marked by the constant shadow of their past, an acknowledgement that they had once been someone's property. The relationship between the elite and their thralls was, in many ways, one of necessity. The kings and jarls needed the labor of the thralls to build their wealth and power, and the thralls needed their masters for survival. But the bond between them was always one of control, of dominance. The kings and jarls held the reins, and the thralls, no matter their dreams or desires, were bound by invisible chains, kept at the mercy of their masters' whims. As we step back from the hall, the image of the elite Viking rulers, sitting high above the laborers and slaves, begins to fade. The world they created, one built on human labor, conquest, and sacrifice, was complex, nuanced, and harsh. In their pursuit of power, they relied not only on their warriors and ships, but on the lives of others, lives that, though marked by suffering, were critical to the Viking world's very existence. And yet, as we have seen throughout this journey, it is the lives of the thralls, those whose names were never recorded, whose voices were silenced by the passing centuries, that echo the loudest through the annals of Viking history. Their labor built the Viking world, their struggles fueled its expansion, and their quiet resistance, like Tovi's escape, speaks to a deeper, more enduring truth, that even in the darkest corners of history, there is always the flicker of hope, the desire for freedom, for dignity, for a life that is one's own. Closing reflection. As you drift toward the end of this journey, I invite you to pause for a moment and reflect. The Vikings, with their great ships, their fierce warriors, and their complex society, have long since faded into history. Yet, the echoes of their world remain, not just in the grand tales of kings and heroes, but in the quiet lives of the thralls who lived in the shadows. The Viking world was shaped by many forces, by the strength of warriors, the vision of kings, and, yes, by the labor of those whose names were never known. And as we reflect on their lives, we are reminded that history, like the Viking world, is complex. There is beauty in its resilience, sorrow in its struggles, and wisdom in its quiet corners. Now, as the warmth of the present settles around you, let the quiet whispers of the past fade softly into the night. Imagine, as you close your eyes, the rhythm of the waves on a Viking shore, the breath of the wind through ancient trees, and the lives of those long gone who left their mark in ways we may never fully understand, but who shaped a world nonetheless. Good night,